They said she was too heavy to work, too slow to run, too broken to fight back. Her name was Mercy, and on the Grafton plantation, her weight wasn't just mocked. It was used to strip her of dignity. When her master, Henry Grafton, proud and cruel, ran out of money, he sold her in front of everyone. The men laughed. The women looked away. But Mercy, she didn't beg. She smiled. Because she carried something no chain could hold. Knowledge of the silver Grafton hid, and the patience to turn humiliation into a weapon. By the time the river stopped moving, one man was gone, and another would soon wish he'd drowned with him. They called her useless, but when Mercy rose from the swamp, the South learned. Even the heaviest woman can make the whole world tremble. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The lard clung to Mercy's wooden spoon like a reluctant child. She scraped it carefully into the tin pail, her movements deliberate, each motion practiced from years of the same chore. Dawn painted the smokehouse in shades of blue-gray, filtering through cracks in the weathered boards. The scent of cured meat hung thick in the air, mingling with wood smoke and the sour tang of fear that never quite left her skin. From beyond the open window came Mistress Evelyn's voice, sharp as a new pin. "That one eats more than she works." The mistress's laugh tinkled like broken glass. "Henry says we lose money every day keeping her." Another woman's voice answered, too low for Mercy to make out the words, but the laughter that followed stabbed deep. Mercy's hand trembled, but only for a moment. She steadied herself against the rough-hewn table and kept working. Her face remained smooth as still water, giving nothing away. The early sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the yard as Mercy carried breakfast to the main house. The weight of the tray pressed into her palms, fresh biscuits, sizzling bacon, eggs cooked just as Master liked them. She entered through the back door, moving with the careful steps of someone who knew what happened when food spilled. The dining room glowed with polished silver and white linen. Master Grafton sat at the head of the table, his face already flushed from morning whiskey. Two men in fine suits flanked him, cotton buyers from New Orleans, judging by their talk of shipments and prices. "Here she comes, finally," Master Grafton announced as Mercy set down the tray. "Slower than molasses in January." The men chuckled, eyes sliding over Mercy as if she were furniture. She kept her gaze on the floor, arranging plates with practiced care. "Could feed 2 field hands on what she eats," Grafton continued, pouring coffee for his guests. "Ain't that right, Mercy?" "Yes, Master," she murmured, the words worn smooth from years of repetition. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Speak up when I talk to you." "Yes, Master," she said louder, feeling the bones in her wrist grind together. Grafton released her with a small shove. "Get on now, and tell Clara to bring more coffee." Mercy backed away, her heart hammering beneath her calico dress. Outside, the morning had grown hot, the kind of thick Mississippi heat that pressed down like a wool blanket. She wiped sweat from her brow and hurried toward the kitchen to relay the master's message. The morning crawled by in a blur of work, floors scrubbed, linens washed, vegetables picked from the garden. It was there, among the climbing bean vines, that Clara found her. Clara moved like a shadow. Her light brown skin marked her as Grafton's daughter, though nobody ever spoke that truth aloud. At 23, she was everything Mercy wasn't. Slender, quick, with eyes that missed nothing. "You heard?" Clara whispered, kneeling beside Mercy to help with the beans. Mercy's hands never stopped moving. "Heard what?" Clara glanced over her shoulder. "Master's been meeting with the bankmen. The cotton ain't bringing what it used to. They say he owes more than this whole place is worth." A chill ran through Mercy despite the heat. "What's that mean for us?" "Means he's looking to sell what he can." Clara's voice dropped even lower. Anybody who can't fetch a price worth keeping, they'll be first to go." The words settled in Mercy's stomach like stones. She had seen it before. Slaves sold off when times got hard, families torn apart like paper. "You sure?" Mercy asked, though she already knew the answer. Clara nodded. "Mistress was crying last night. They fightin' about money again." They worked in silence after that, the only sound the soft plunk of beans hitting the wooden basket. Mercy's thoughts churned like storm clouds. At 36, she wasn't young anymore. Her hands were strong from years of work, but her size made her less desirable to buyers looking for field hands. Master had commented on it often enough, especially when the whiskey loosened his tongue. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Mercy carried water to the wash-house. That's when Tobias found her. The stable boy was barely 16, all gangly limbs and watchful eyes. "Miss Mercy," he said, pretending to check the water pump. Master was in the study with Mr. Whitfield from the auction house. Mercy felt her chest tighten. "What they say?" Tobias kept his voice low. Master said, "That big sow's worth more sold than fed." Then they was looking at papers and talking about Thursday. Thursday, 2 days away. The auction day in Greenwood. "You sure he meant me?" Mercy asked, though the answer was written across Tobias's worried face. "I'm sure," he whispered. "Be careful, Miss Mercy." That night, alone in her cabin, Mercy sat on her thin pallet. Through the gaps in the rough planks, moonlight sliced the darkness into silver ribbons. Her mind traveled back 2 months, to a night when Master Grafton had staggered into the smokehouse, drunk and boasting. "Smart as a whip, I am," he'd slurred, not realizing Mercy was cleaning in the shadows. "Bank won't get what's mine." He'd proudly thumped a wooden crate lid where he'd burned a crude map, X marking the spot behind the smokehouse where he'd buried his silver coins. "Insurance," he'd called it, laughing at his own cleverness. Mercy had said nothing, but her eyes had memorized every line on that makeshift map. Every twist of the path, every landmark burned into the wood, had burned equally into her mind. Now she lay on her pallet, staring at the ceiling, sleep impossible. Through the thin walls of her cabin, she could hear the main house, the creak of floorboards, the murmur of voices, then clearer, the clink of coins and Master Grafton's low voice. "Tomorrow's sale should cover it," he muttered. "That fat one first, then maybe the boy." The coins clinked again, followed by the thud of a box being closed. Mercy's breath caught in her throat. Not Thursday, then. Tomorrow. The night air pressed down, heavy with the promise of rain and the certainty of what morning would bring. She closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she saw the map from the crate lid, every line and curve perfect in her memory. Behind her closed lids, those marks transformed, no longer just a path to silver coins, but perhaps something else entirely. Something like hope. Or revenge. The morning came too quickly, the rooster's cry cutting through Mercy's restless dreams. She rose with stiff joints, her body protesting the hard palate and the harder truth of what today would bring. Outside her cabin window, the first wagon rolled up the long drive, wheels crunching on gravel. Then another. And another. By the time Mercy splashed water on her face from the wash basin, the yard had filled with men in wide-brimmed hats and women in fine dresses, all come to see what Grafton Plantation had to sell. Mercy tied her headscarf tight, smoothed her faded dress, and stepped out into the morning light. The visitors moved around her like water around a stone, hardly noticing her presence. Their laughter floated on the air, mixing with the smell of tobacco smoke that curled from pipes and cigars. "Mercy!" Mistress Evelyn's voice cut through the noise. She stood on the front porch, her face pinched with annoyance. "These steps are filthy. Get the scrub brush and bucket. I want this porch spotless before the auction starts." "Yes, mistress," Mercy replied, keeping her voice even. The pine boards of the porch were already clean from yesterday's work, but Mercy fetched the brush and bucket anyway. She filled it with water from the pump, added lye soap, and carried it back to the house. The weight of the full bucket strained her arms, water sloshing over the sides with each step. She knelt on the porch, her knees protesting against the hard wood. The lye soap bit at her hands as she dipped the brush and began to scrub. Around her, feet shuffled past, polished boots and leather shoes, the hems of expensive dresses brushing near her fingers. "Harder now," Mistress Evelyn said, standing over her. "I want to see my reflection in those boards." Mercy pressed the brush down with more force, moving it in small circles. Her back ached from bending, but she kept her face calm, her emotions locked away where no one could see them. From the side lawn came Master Grafton's booming voice. He had gathered a group of men around his prized horses, showing off their lines and breeding. Mercy kept scrubbing, but her ears caught every word. "Fine stock," Grafton proclaimed. "Unlike some on this plantation." The men laughed. "Got one so lazy and fat, she eats more than my best field hand produces." More laughter. Mercy's brush slowed for just a moment before she forced herself to continue. The soap suds turned gray with dirt that hadn't been there to begin with. "Going to remedy that today," Grafton continued. "No man should have to feed what doesn't earn its keep." The men murmured their agreement, and Mercy heard the clink of coins as bets were placed on how much she would fetch. The lowest guess brought the loudest laughter. As she moved to a new section of the porch, a shadow fell across the boards. She looked up to see Preacher Saul, his body bent with age, but his eyes clear and knowing. The elderly man carried a Bible under one arm, permitted to keep it because he preached only the passages Master Grafton approved. "Water for the gentleman," he announced, setting down a tray of cups. As he bent closer to Mercy, his voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The first shall be last, and the last shall be first," he murmured, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment. Before she could respond, he straightened and moved away, serving water to the visitors with a subservient smile that never reached his eyes. Mercy watched him go, his words settling deep inside her like seeds in fertile soil. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the plantation with merciless heat. Sweat trickled between Mercy's shoulder blades as she worked her way across the porch. Her stomach growled with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's meager supper. A small shadow fell across her hands. Clara stood there, pretending to sweep nearby. "Here," Clara whispered, dropping something next to the bucket. A biscuit, still warm from the kitchen. Mercy quickly picked it up and tucked it into her pocket. "Thank you," she breathed. Clara swept closer. "They're talking in the study. Master plans to make a show of you at the auction. Says he'll teach you humility before you go." The words should have stung, but Mercy felt oddly calm. A strange stillness had settled over her, like the quiet before a storm. "Then let him try," she replied softly. Clara's eyes widened at the tone in Mercy's voice. It wasn't resignation or fear. It was something else entirely. Before she could respond, Mistress Evelyn's voice called out for more refreshments, and Clara hurried away. Mercy finished the porch as the sun began its slow descent. Her knees were raw, her hands red and chapped from the lye. Master Grafton appeared, smelling of whiskey, though the day was not yet done. "Time to get you ready," he said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Can't have you looking too shabby for your new owner." Two field hands escorted her to a small storage shed, near where they had built the auction platform. The wooden structure smelled of dust and old grain. A single window, too small for escape, let in the fading light. "You stay put now," one of the men said, almost apologetically. "They'll come for you when it's time." The door closed, and the lock clicked into place. Mercy stood in the dimness, listening to the sounds of the plantation preparing for the evening's business. From nearby came the steady rhythm of hammers striking wood, the finishing touches on the auction platform. Men's voices rose and fell, punctuated by bursts of laughter. They were discussing prices, values, the worth of human flesh, her flesh. Mercy moved to the wall closest to the sounds and pressed her palm against the rough boards. Through the wood, she felt the vibration of footsteps on the platform, testing its strength. Would it hold her weight? The thought brought not shame, but a strange comfort. They'll remember this weight when it presses back, she whispered to the empty shed. Outside, the hammering stopped. Voices called that the platform was ready. Mercy stood in the gathering darkness, waiting. The map in her mind glowed bright as fire, every detail of Grafton's secret hiding place etched in her memory. Whatever happened tonight, she would not leave empty-handed. The sun slipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the tiny window. In the distance, someone rang the dinner bell. Soon, they would come for her. Morning arrived bright and cruel. Mercy woke to the door of the shed being thrown open. Two men stood silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. One of Grafton's overseers, and a field hand she barely knew. Their faces were set in grim lines. Time, was all the overseer said. Rough hands pulled her to her feet. Outside, the plantation yard had transformed. A wooden platform stood in the center, surrounded by rows of chairs where buyers sat fanning themselves against the heat. Others stood in clusters, pointing and whispering as Mercy emerged from the shed. "Wrists!" the overseer commanded, producing a length of coarse rope. Mercy extended her arms, watching as he bound her wrists together, the hemp biting into her skin. They hadn't let her clean up or change clothes. Her dress was still stained with lye soap and sweat from yesterday's scrubbing. "Move," the overseer said, pushing her forward. The crowd parted as she approached the auction block. Mercy felt the weight of their stares, some curious, others cruel, a few pitying. She kept her eyes on the ground, counting her steps, focusing on the feel of the warm dirt beneath her bare feet. The wooden steps creaked as she climbed to the platform. Standing center stage, Mercy finally lifted her gaze. The crowd seemed larger now. At least 30 people gathered to witness her humiliation. Master Grafton stood off to the side, dressed in his finest coat despite the heat, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen," called the auctioneer, a thin man with a voice like stretched leather, "next lot for your consideration." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. In the front row, a red-faced man in a checkered vest nudged his companion. "Bet she weighs more than my prize hog." $5 says she tops 300 pounds, another called out. Coins clinked as bets were placed. Mercy stood still as stone, her face betraying nothing while inside her chest, her heart hammered against her ribs. "Come now," the auctioneer continued, circling her like a hawk. "Good worker, healthy, 36 years of age, can cook, clean, tend garden. Startin' bid at $600. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. Not a single hand raised. The auctioneer's smile faltered. $500 then. Who'll give me $500? More silence. A few coughs. Someone snickered. Master Grafton stepped forward, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. "What's the matter with you all? She's worth at least that." "For what?" called a voice from the back. "Eating you out of house and home?" The crowd erupted in laughter. Mercy kept her eyes fixed on a point in the distance, beyond the trees that marked the edge of Grafton Plantation. She didn't flinch, didn't blink away the tears that threatened to form. Grafton climbed the steps to stand beside her on the platform. He grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her flesh. "Listen here. She may be big, but she works. Show them your hands, girl." He yanked her bound wrists up, displaying her calloused palms to the crowd. "These aren't idle hands." $400, someone finally called half-heartedly. $350, countered another, sounding bored. Master Grafton's grip tightened, his knuckles white with rage. He'd expected more, needed more to cover his mounting debts. Mercy could see the desperation hiding behind his anger. "You folks don't know what you're passing up," he sneered, releasing her arm and addressing the crowd. "She's fat enough to feed the whole parish if times get hard." The joke landed poorly, drawing only scattered laughter. Grafton's face darkened further. He turned to her, eyes narrowing. "Tell them how useful you are, girl." Something shifted inside Mercy then. A lifetime of swallowed words rose up her throat. She lifted her chin and looked directly at him. "You wouldn't sell me if they knew where your silver's buried, master." Her voice rang out clear as a church bell over the suddenly silent crowd. Every head turned. Every whisper ceased. Master Grafton froze, his face draining of color as the meaning of her words registered. "What did you say?" he whispered, but the crowd heard it in the perfect silence. Mercy met his gaze without flinching. "The silver you hid from the bank. The money you owe to half the men standing here." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone called out, "What silver, Grafton?" Panic flashed across Master Grafton's face, quickly replaced by fury. His hand shot out, striking Mercy across the cheek with enough force to make her stagger. The sharp crack echoed in the stunned silence. "She's lying!" he shouted, but his voice trembled. "She's simple-minded. Doesn't know what she's saying." But the damage was done. The buyers exchanged glances, suddenly interested in what else Mercy might know. One of Grafton's creditors stepped forward, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. 300, called a new voice from the back of the crowd. Heads turned to see a lean, weather-beaten man step forward. Ezekiel Crane, a traveling slave trader known for buying cheap and selling to the sugar plantations down south. His reputation for cruelty preceded him. 300 for the woman, he repeated, jingling coins in his pocket. "Cash money, right now." Grafton looked from Crane to Mercy, calculation written across his face. He needed to silence her quickly, before she could say more about his hidden assets. "Sold!" he barked, before anyone could place a higher bid. 300 to Crane. The auctioneer, bewildered by the sudden conclusion, banged his gavel. "Sold for $300. Crane climbed the steps with a satisfied smile, producing rope from his coat pocket. He bound Mercy's arms to her sides, tying knots that bit into her flesh through the thin fabric of her dress. With a rough tug, he pulled her down from the platform. "My wagon's this way," he grunted, dragging her through the parting crowd. As they passed Master Grafton, Mercy locked eyes with him one last time. His face was a mask of barely controlled rage and fear. "I remember every map you drew drunk," she said evenly, her voice carrying just far enough for him and those nearby to hear. "Every single one." Grafton's hand moved toward the pistol at his waist, but too many eyes were watching now. Too many questions already hung in the air about silver and hidden money. Crane yanked the rope, pulling Mercy away toward a waiting wagon at the edge of the yard. She climbed in without assistance, settling her bulk on the wooden floor among crates and supplies. Two other enslaved people huddled in the corner, their eyes downcast. The wagon lurched into motion, wheels creaking under the weight. Through the back opening, Mercy watched Grafton Plantation grow smaller, dust rising from the dirt road between them. But the map remained clear in her mind. Every detail, every landmark, every secret Grafton had carelessly revealed. The wagon bumped and jolted down the muddy road, each rut sending pain through Mercy's back. Gray clouds hung low overhead, promising rain but withholding it, leaving the air thick and hard to breathe. She sat among 5 others, all chained at the ankles, bodies swaying with the uneven motion of the wheels. Mercy studied her fellow captives without turning her head. To her right sat an elderly man, whose hands trembled constantly. Across from her, 2 young men, barely more than boys, huddled together. Beside them was a scarred field hand, perhaps in his 30s. his face a map of old wounds and quiet suffering. At the far end sat a young woman, thin and shaking, whose eyes remained fixed on some distant point, as if seeing something no one else could. At the front, Ezekiel Crane hunched over the reins, his broad shoulders twitching whenever the wagon hit a particularly deep hole. A leather whip lay coiled beside him, ready for use. The outline of a bottle protruded from his hip pocket, and even from several feet away, Mercy could smell the sharp tang of whiskey that clung to him like a second skin. "Water," croaked the elderly man, his voice barely audible over the creaking wheels. Crane didn't turn around. "You'll drink when we stop. Keep quiet." Mercy shifted her weight, trying to find a position that didn't make her legs cramp. The chains bit into her ankles, already raw from 2 days of travel. She'd had little to eat beyond stale bread and thin soup, but hunger was the least of her concerns. She needed to learn, to watch, to understand the man who now owned her. By midday, rain finally began to fall in fat, heavy drops. Crane cursed and pulled a tarpaulin from beneath the seat, tossing it back at them. "Cover yourselves. I ain't nursing sick slaves," he barked. The scarred man caught the tarp and carefully spread it over all of them, his movements deliberate and practiced. As his hands brushed near Mercy's, he glanced at her briefly. "Elijah," he whispered, so softly she almost missed it. "Mercy," she replied, equally quiet. That night, they camped beneath a stand of oak trees. Crane built a fire, cooked a rabbit for himself, and tossed them each a piece of hardtack bread. He uncorked his bottle and drank deeply, his eyes growing glassy as the fire burned low. When he finally staggered to his bedroll, he slept quickly and heavily, his snores punctuating the night air. Mercy noted how completely the whiskey claimed him, how he didn't stir even when one of the young men coughed violently. The next morning brought more rain and mud. The wagon wheels sank deeper, forcing them all to climb down and push, while Crane cursed and struck the mules. The young woman stumbled and fell, earning a lash from Crane's whip that left a thin red line across her shoulders. "What's your name?" Mercy asked her quietly when they were back in the wagon. "Naomi," she answered, her voice barely a whisper. "They took my baby." She was only 3 months old. Her hands moved constantly, as if rocking an invisible child. "I'm sorry," Mercy said, feeling the inadequacy of the words. As the day wore on, Elijah edged closer to Mercy. "He's taking us to Bayou des Lys," he murmured. "Sugar plantations. Few come back from there." "You been this way before?" Mercy asked. Elijah nodded. "Third time sold. First time this far south." His fingers traced one of the scars on his forearm. "We follow the river all the way. Another 4 days if weather holds." That evening, as Crane set up camp, Mercy watched him more carefully. He kept a small tin box tucked beneath the driver's seat, checking it whenever he thought no one was looking. Coins clinked inside, the sound of Mercy's purchase price and whatever other money he carried. When he ordered them to gather firewood, she pretended to stumble, falling heavily to her knees with a convincing moan. Crane stomped over, annoyed. "Get up, woman," he growled. "My chest," Mercy gasped. "Can't breathe right." Crane scowled. "I paid good money for you. Don't you die on me." He loosened the rope around her middle, giving her lungs more space to expand. "Better?" Mercy nodded weakly, but her eyes were sharp, taking in every detail of how he tied the knots, how quickly he could loosen them, how close he needed to be to do so. Later that night, while the others slept, and Crane snored by the fire, Mercy stared at the stars. The Big Dipper hung low in the northern sky. She'd learned from Clara which stars pointed north, which meant they were indeed heading south and west, deeper into Louisiana territory. Northwest was fading behind them with each passing mile. "You watching the stars?" Elijah's voice came soft beside her. "Yes," Mercy whispered back. "My friend taught me they're like a map in the sky. My father said the same, Elijah replied. Said they led people to freedom sometimes. Mercy turned to look at him, seeing the moonlight reflect in his eyes. Have you tried? To run? Twice, he answered, touching a particularly deep scar on his neck. Got this the second time. Naomi stirred on Mercy's other side. I hear water, she whispered. The river must be close. It is, Elijah confirmed. We'll cross tomorrow, probably. There's a ferry Crane uses. Man owes him favors. Mercy absorbed this information, adding it to what she'd already gathered. Crane's drinking habits, the location of his money, the direction of their travel, the proximity of the Mississippi River, how deeply he slept after whiskey, how the keys to their chains hung from his belt. All through the night, Mercy's mind worked, fitting pieces together like a quilt pattern. When dawn approached, she had the beginnings of a plan forming in her thoughts. The next day brought them within sight of the great river. It flowed wide and muddy, carrying debris from upstream storms. They camped early, waiting for morning to cross. Crane drank more heavily than usual, complaining about the ferry operator's prices. Highway robbery, he muttered, taking another long pull from his bottle. Man knows I got no choice if I want to cross with a wagon. That night, the fire burned low as Crane's snores filled the camp. Mercy lay awake, feeling the weight of the chains, hearing the distant sound of water flowing. She turned to Elijah and Naomi, who were also awake, their eyes reflecting the dying embers. Tomorrow, Mercy whispered to them, her voice barely audible above Crane's snoring. Tomorrow, the water carries the chains instead of me. By late afternoon, the wagon creaked to a halt near the edge of the swamp. The air hung thick and green, filled with the chirping of insects and distant calls of birds. Water pooled in muddy footprints, and moss draped from cypress trees like old men's beards. Crane jumped down from the driver's seat, stretching his back with a groan. We camp here tonight, he announced, eyeing the darkening sky. Too dangerous to cross this stretch after dark. The captives climbed down slowly, chains rattling. Their faces showed the exhaustion of days on the road, hollow-eyed, lips cracked from thirst. Crane unlocked their ankle chains but left their wrists bound. Need firewood and water, he barked, pointing at the young men. You two, go. And don't think about running. Snakes and gators out there love fresh meat. As Elijah moved to help set up camp, Mercy stepped forward. I can cook, she offered, her voice carefully modulated to sound meek. Saw mushrooms back there. Make a good stew with that rabbit you caught. Crane squinted at her suspiciously, then shrugged. Fine, but Naomi goes with you, and be quick about it. Mercy nodded, gesturing for Naomi to follow. They walked slowly away from camp, Mercy's eyes scanning the ground carefully. When they were out of earshot, Naomi whispered, What are you doing? We should run now. Not yet, Mercy replied softly, bending to examine a cluster of mushrooms growing at the base of a tree. We need what he has first, the papers, the money, and we need the others ready. Her fingers worked deftly, selecting mushrooms and tucking them into the fold of her apron. Most were brown with thick stems, good for eating, but a few had distinctive red caps with white spots. These she placed in a separate fold, away from the others. These are death caps, Mercy explained quietly, showing Naomi. My grandmother taught me. Enough can kill a man. Just enough makes him sick and confused. Naomi's eyes widened. You're going to poison him? Just enough, Mercy repeated, her face calm but determined. Not to kill, to make him speak truth. They gathered more edible mushrooms, filling the main pocket of Mercy's apron. By the time they returned to camp, Crane had built a small fire and was already drinking from his bottle. About time, he grumbled, watching as Mercy arranged stones to support a small cooking pot. She worked silently, chopping the mushrooms and adding them to the pot along with the rabbit meat. The stew bubbled slowly, releasing a rich, earthy smell that made everyone's stomachs growl. All the while, Mercy kept the poisonous mushrooms hidden in her sleeve. When the stew was nearly ready, she moved toward Crane, who sat with his back against the wagon wheel, bottle half empty beside him. "Need salt from the wagon supplies," she said, pointing to the storage box. Crane waved his hand lazily. "Get it then, and be quick." As she climbed onto the wagon, Mercy's eyes darted quickly to where Crane had hidden his money box. She grabbed the salt tin and slipped back down. When Crane wasn't looking, she ground the red mushrooms between two stones, crushing them into a fine powder. The moment came when Crane set his bottle down and walked to the edge of camp to relieve himself. Mercy moved swiftly, sprinkling the powder into his whiskey, swirling it to dissolve. The liquid darkened slightly, but in the failing light, it would go unnoticed. Dinner was served in silence. Crane ate greedily, washing down the stew with long pulls from his doctored bottle. He didn't offer the whiskey to anyone else. Never did. His selfishness would be his undoing. The captives huddled together as night fell, Mercy deliberately positioning herself where she could watch Crane. An hour passed, then two. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the camp. Finally, Crane's face began to glisten with sweat despite the cool evening air. He stood unsteadily, his eyes unfocused. "Something's wrong," he mumbled, clutching his stomach. "Water. Need water." Crane staggered a few steps before collapsing to his knees. The other captives drew back in alarm, but Mercy moved forward, kneeling beside him. "The swamp spirit's angry," she whispered, her voice taking on a rhythmic quality. "You best confess, or they'll drag you under." Crane's eyes widened, darting frantically around the darkened swamp. The mushrooms were working on his mind now, making shadows move and trees seem to breathe. He clutched at Mercy's arm. "What spirits?" he gasped. "Make them go away." "Can't go away till you speak truth," Mercy continued, leaning closer. "What papers you carrying? Who you meeting? Where's the money hidden?" His resistance crumbled quickly. Half delirious, Crane began to talk, words tumbling out between gasps for breath. "Papers! In the red leather case," he panted. "Proof of sales. Illegal ones. Grafton and others. Selling to Cuba when they ain't supposed to. Buyer in Baton Rouge pays good money for such proof. Uses it for blackmail." Mercy nodded slowly. "And the gold? For bribes?" "Under the driver's seat," Crane moaned, rolling onto his side. "False bottom. Carved out. Enough to pay off patrolmen. Bridge keepers. Ferrymen. Don't let them take me." The others had gathered closer now, listening in amazement as the trader revealed his secrets. Elijah caught Mercy's eye, a new respect showing in his gaze. "How many days to Baton Rouge?" Mercy asked, pressing her advantage. "3, maybe 4 if weather holds," Crane answered, his eyes rolling. "Meeting at the Red Boar Inn. Man named Thaddeus. Wears a green neckerchief." Sweat poured from his face now, soaking his shirt collar. His breathing came in ragged gasps, but Mercy knew he would survive. The dose had been carefully measured, enough to break his mind temporarily, not stop his heart. As the night deepened, Crane fell into fitful sleep, occasionally crying out about shadows and water spirits. The other captives moved closer to Mercy, their faces questioning. "We leave before dawn," she whispered. "I'll get the keys from his belt while he sleeps." "What about the papers? The gold?" Elijah asked. "We take them," Mercy answered simply. "Might need them later." By the first gray light of morning, Crane lay half-conscious on the damp ground. Mercy had already retrieved the keys, unlocked everyone's bonds, and found the hidden compartment under the driver's seat. Inside was a leather pouch heavy with gold coins, enough to bribe their way north, perhaps even to buy passage on a riverboat. The red leather case contained what he'd promised, documents signed by plantation owners, including Grafton, detailing illegal sales to Cuban buyers. Names, dates, prices, all carefully recorded. As the others prepared to leave, Mercy knelt beside Crane one last time. His eyes fluttered open, confusion still clouding them. "You done confessed your sin to the wrong preacher?" she whispered. The swamp fog curled thick around them, drifting between the cypress trees like ghostly figures. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. A warning or a welcome, Mercy couldn't tell. But as she tucked the papers and coins into her dress, she felt a plan forming, clear as day in her mind. Dark clouds rolled across the sky like bruises as the wagon lurched into Bayou des Lys. The cypress trees loomed on either side of the narrow road, their knobby knees breaking through the swampy water. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a warning. Mercy sat on the driver's bench, reins gripped tightly in her calloused hands. The horses snorted nervously, sensing the coming storm. Behind her, inside the wagon's cage, Crane lay curled on his side. The poison still worked through his system, leaving him weak and confused. His moans mingled with the creaking of the wheels. "Water rising!" Elijah called from where he walked alongside. The muddy path had already begun to disappear beneath the swelling bayou. The first fat raindrops splattered against Mercy's face as she pulled the wagon to a stop. The sky opened suddenly, rain pouring down in gray sheets that made the world blur at the edges. Lightning flashed, illuminating the flooded path ahead, a road that disappeared into deep, murky water. "Storm's getting worse," Mercy announced, her voice steady despite the thunder. "Wagon's too heavy to make it through. Everyone out." Naomi hesitated, rain plastering her thin dress to her skin. "Out? Into the water? Safer to wade than drown if the wagon sinks," Mercy explained, climbing down from the bench. "Everyone stay close to the edge. Water's more shallow there." The 5 captives climbed out reluctantly, flinching as cold water rose to their knees. They huddled together, watching Mercy with questioning eyes. She walked to the back of the wagon and peered through the wooden slats at Crane. His face was pale, eyes glassy with fever, but he'd begun to regain some clarity, enough to understand what was happening. "Get me out," he croaked, crawling toward the gate. "The wagon's sinking." Mercy's face remained impassive as rain streamed down it. "Yes," she agreed. "It is." Behind her, Elijah and the others exchanged worried glances. They'd known Mercy planned something, but this, watching her calmly prepare to drown a man, was more than they'd expected. Mercy untied the horses from the wagon, slapping their rumps to send them splashing toward higher ground. Then she turned to the others. "Go north," she instructed, pointing to a ridge barely visible through the downpour. "Follow that rise until you reach the river road. Storm will hide your tracks." "What about you?" Naomi asked. "I'll follow," Mercy lied. "Need to finish this first." Thunder cracked overhead as Mercy gripped the wagon's rear wheel and began to push. The vehicle groaned, sliding deeper into the rising water. Inside, Crane's eyes widened with terrified understanding. "Wait!" he shouted, voice shrill with panic. He clawed at the locked gate. "I've got more gold, hidden in my boot heel. Take it all." Mercy pushed harder, muscles straining beneath her soaked dress. The wagon crept forward, water now reaching its floorboards. "You can't do this," Crane pleaded. "It's murder." "You're just a slave woman." Mercy paused, looking directly into his frightened eyes. Rain plastered her hair to her forehead as she spoke with quiet certainty. "You bought me cheap," she said. "You die expensive." With a final heave, she pushed the wagon past the edge of the submerged road. For a moment, it teetered there, balanced between solid ground and the deep channel. Crane screamed, throwing himself against the locked gate, fingers reaching through the slats. Then the wagon tipped forward with a sickening lurch. The front end plunged down, pulling the rest after it. Water rushed in through the slats as the wagon began to sink. Crane's screams turned to gurgling cries, Then silence, as muddy water claimed him. Bubbles broke the surface, then nothing. The wagon had vanished beneath the churning, rain-pocked water. The others stood frozen in shock, rain beating against their shoulders. Elijah's mouth hung open, his eyes fixed on the spot where Crane had disappeared. "Lord, have mercy," he whispered. "He didn't," Mercy replied simply. "So I didn't." Lightning flashed again, casting harsh white light over the scene. In that brief illumination, the captives saw something new in Mercy's face. A terrible satisfaction, quickly masked by determination. She waded to shore, water streaming from her clothes. From her pocket, she pulled the keys she'd taken from Crane and methodically unlocked each person's remaining bonds. The metal shackles fell into the mud, already half buried by the rain. "You're free now," she told them, voice raised above the storm's howl. "Head north like I said. Patrollers won't be out in this weather." Naomi clutched Mercy's arm. "Come with us. Whatever you're planning, it's done." Mercy gently removed the woman's hand. "One debt still breathing." "Grafton?" Elijah asked, understanding dawning on his face. Mercy nodded once, her expression hardening. "You go your way. I go mine." "They'll kill you if you go back," Naomi protested. "Maybe," Mercy conceded, "but some debts can only be paid in person." The rain fell in curtains around them, each drop striking Mercy's skin like a reminder of all she'd suffered. The thunder seemed to echo the beating of her heart. Steady, relentless, unforgiving. "Take this," she said, pressing half the gold coins into Elijah's hand. "Buy your way north if you have to. Find the big river. Follow it." The others huddled closer, reluctant to leave her behind. But Mercy stepped away, already turning her face toward Mississippi. "Go," she commanded, "before the water rises more." They backed away slowly, faces troubled. Only when they'd climbed to higher ground did they turn and move north, their forms quickly swallowed by the storm's gray veil. Mercy stood alone at the edge of the flooded road, rain mixing with the tears that finally slipped down her cheeks. She'd killed a man today, watched him drown without a trace of mercy in her heart. The weight of that act should have crushed her. Instead, it had only hardened her resolve. She began walking south, each step deliberate despite the mud that sucked at her feet. The storm raged around her, lightning splitting the sky into jagged pieces. But inside, Mercy felt a terrible calm, the quiet at the center of a hurricane. Grafton's plantation waited 3 days' journey away. His silver, his lies, his cruelty, all of it would soon meet its reckoning. And this time, she wouldn't be the one up for sale. A pale sun struggled through morning mist as Mercy limped along a narrow deer path. 2 days had passed since the swamp. 2 days of walking back roads, avoiding patrols, sleeping in ditches when exhaustion overtook her. Her cloak, stolen from a clothesline the previous night, hung heavy with dew around her shoulders. The soles of her feet were cracked and blistered, leaving faint blood marks on the packed earth behind her. Still, she walked, one foot in front of the other. Her body ached, but her mind remained sharp, focused on the single purpose that drove her forward. Grafton. By midday, rain returned, a gentle drizzle that masked her movements as she cut through a cotton field. The plants stood tall and green, not yet ready for harvest. She plucked a leaf and crushed it between her fingers, remembering the countless hours she'd spent bent over these fields as a child, back when her body was small and quick, before the years of kitchen work had widened her frame. As dusk approached, Mercy spotted an abandoned barn in the distance. Its weathered boards sagged against the darkening sky, offering shelter for the night. She checked for signs of habitation before slipping inside. The interior smelled of old hay and mice, but the roof seemed mostly intact. Mercy settled in a corner, her back against the wall. From her pocket, she pulled Crane's papers, the documents that proved Grafton's illegal dealings. She couldn't read the words, but she knew their power. Evidence. Proof. Weapons more dangerous than any knife. Sleep came quickly, pulling her into darkness. When she woke, dawn mist crept through cracks in the barn walls like ghostly fingers. Mercy rose stiffly, muscles protesting. She ate the last of her stolen cornbread, saving a crust for later. Outside, birds called to each other across the clearing. A normal day beginning, though nothing about her purpose felt normal. She walked all morning, staying to the edges of fields and the shadows of tree lines. By afternoon, familiar landmarks began to appear. A bent oak tree struck by lightning years ago. A creek where she'd once washed clothes as a child. She was close now, very close. Mercy moved more cautiously as the sun began its descent. The land here remembered her, but she couldn't trust it to keep her secrets. At one point, she froze as a patrol rode past, pressing herself flat against the ground until hoofbeats faded. Twilight settled over the countryside when she finally glimpsed it. Grafton Plantation rising from the landscape like a rotten tooth. The white columns of the main house glowed faintly in the dying light. Smoke curled from the kitchen chimney. Everything looked unchanged, as though she'd never left. But Mercy had changed. The woman who returned bore little resemblance to the one who'd been dragged away. That woman had been afraid. This one carried poison in her pocket, and a man's death on her conscience. She waited until full dark before creeping closer. From the cover of trees, she watched lights flicker in the mansion windows. Voices drifted across the yard. Laughter, the clink of glasses. Grafton entertaining guests, perhaps? Or preparing for tomorrow's auction. The slave cabins stood in shadow, their small windows mostly dark. Mercy knew each one. Who lived where, which boards creaked, which doors hung crooked. She made her way toward them, staying low, using the night as her shield. Her old cabin remained empty, just as she'd expected. Mercy slipped inside, the familiar smells of damp earth and old wood wrapping around her. Someone had taken her few possessions, the quilt she'd pieced together over years, the wooden comb, the small tin cup. But as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, something glinted on the dirt floor. Mercy knelt, fingers searching until they closed around a familiar object, Clara's necklace. The simple string of wooden beads that Clara's mother had made her, now broken, the cord snapped. Clara would never willingly part with it. Mercy clutched the necklace, a cold dread spreading through her chest. Something had happened. Something bad. A small sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps, light and hesitant, approached the cabin. Mercy pressed herself against the wall beside the door, ready to fight if necessary. A child's face appeared in the doorway. Tobias, the same stable boy who'd warned her of her sale days before. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Miss Mercy?" he whispered, disbelief in his voice. "Everyone says you dead." "Not yet," she replied softly. "Where's Clara?" Tobias glanced nervously over his shoulder before slipping inside. He couldn't be more than 9 years old, all skinny limbs and watchful eyes. "Master Grafton caught her," he whispered, voice trembling. "She was behind the kitchen, teaching Lucy and me our letters. He went crazy mad, hit her hard. Said teaching slaves to read was against the law." Mercy's grip tightened on the broken necklace. "Where is she now?" "Locked in the tobacco barn." Tobias pointed toward a dark structure beyond the main house. "Master's selling her tomorrow. First thing at auction." The coldness in Mercy's chest hardened into something like stone. "Who's he selling her to?" "Don't know," Tobias admitted. "But I heard him tell Mistress Evelyn he'd make an example of her. Said he was sending her to the sugar fields down south where they work slaves till they drop dead." Mercy knew those places. Plantations where life expectancy could be measured in months, not years. A death sentence disguised as a sale. "You need to go," she told Tobias. "Forget you saw me." The boy hesitated. They say a ghost pushed Mr. Crane into the swamp. Was that you?" Mercy didn't answer, but something in her eyes made the boy back away. "I won't tell," he promised, then slipped out into the night. Alone again, Mercy tucked Clara's necklace into her pocket. She wouldn't let Clara disappear into the sugar field, not while she still breathed. Moving silently, she made her way toward the tobacco barn. The structure loomed against the night sky, larger than the other outbuildings. A single lantern hung by its entrance, casting a pool of yellow light that Mercy carefully avoided. From the shadow of a nearby tree, she watched the barn door. A figure paced inside, visible through cracks between the wooden planks. Grafton, unmistakable even at a distance. His distinctive gait, the way he held his shoulders, the pistol hanging from his belt, she knew him instantly. The lantern light painted his face a sickly yellow as he paused to take a drink from his flask. His features seemed haggard, drawn tight with worry or anger. He barked something Mercy couldn't hear, then resumed pacing. Clara must be inside, Mercy realized. Grafton was guarding her personally, unwilling to trust even his overseers with this particular prisoner. Perhaps he feared she'd spread her dangerous knowledge to others. Or perhaps he simply enjoyed tormenting her. Mercy pressed her hand against the tree trunk, steadying herself. The rage that had driven her these past days crystallized into something colder and more precise. This was no longer just about her humiliation or her revenge. It was about Clara, about all of them. "You sold me once," she whispered, watching Grafton's silhouette move back and forth like a caged animal. "Now it's your turn on the block." Morning arrived without a breeze. The air hung thick and still, promising heat, but delivering only a suffocating closeness that pressed down on the plantation. Grafton Plantation looked almost festive. Colored ribbons draped the porch columns, and servants bustled about with trays of cool drinks and small foods. Master Grafton himself stood at the center of it all, dressed in his finest black coat despite the heat. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he guided his guests across the manicured lawn toward the auction block. The platform had been rebuilt since Mercy's sale. Taller now, with fresh white paint and a new step for displaying merchandise. "Gentlemen, I appreciate you coming on such short notice," Grafton announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "Especially my friends from the bank." He nodded toward three stern-faced men in matching gray suits, who stood slightly apart from the other guests. Mercy watched from behind a wagon, her large frame hidden by a borrowed dress and shawl. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed her face. In the week since her return, she'd observed the plantation routines from hiding, sleeping in the woods and stealing food when necessary. Now she stood among the crowd of cooks and servants who had accompanied their masters to the auction, just another face in the background. The basket over her arm felt heavy, not from its contents, but from what those contents would soon unleash. "As you can see, gentlemen, my finances are quite healthy again," Grafton continued, gesturing toward the freshly painted main house. "This troublesome period of tight credit is behind us. Today's sale will simply remove an unwanted influence from my property." The wealthy planters nodded, sipping cool drinks in the morning heat. The bankmen looked less convinced, their expressions guarded as they surveyed the plantation. Mercy recognized the look of men counting debts. A bell rang, and the crowd shifted toward the auction block. From the tobacco barn, two overseers emerged, dragging a struggling figure between them. Clara, her wrists bound with rope, her dress torn at the shoulder. Dark bruises marked her arms where rough hands had gripped her. Mercy's heart pounded against her ribs. She forced herself to remain still, though every instinct screamed to run forward. Clara was pushed up the steps to the auction platform. Her face, usually composed, showed naked fear as she scanned the crowd. She didn't notice Mercy among the faces. Grafton climbed the steps after her, using his walking stick, though he had no real need for it. The silver handle gleamed in the sunlight as he gestured toward Clara. "This woman," he announced, was caught teaching other slaves to read, a criminal act under Mississippi law. Rather than involve the authorities, I've chosen to simply remove her from my household." The crowd murmured. Some nodded in approval. Others simply looked bored. Literacy among slaves leads only to rebellion and discontent. Grafton continued, "I will not tolerate such defiance on my property." The auctioneer, a tall man with a booming voice, stepped forward. "Let's start the bidding at $200. Who'll give me $200 for this fine housemaid?" A man near the front raised his hand. "$200! $250!" called another. Clara stood rigid, tears streaming silently down her face. Her eyes remained fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd, as though she could will herself elsewhere. Mercy took a deep breath. The moment had come. She moved through the crowd, basket clutched to her chest. No one paid her any mind. Just another slave carrying her master's belongings. "300!" someone called. "350!" countered another voice. The auctioneer nodded energetically. "350! Do I hear 4?" Mercy stepped into the clearing before the auction block. With deliberate slowness, she removed her wide-brimmed hat. "I have something to say about this sale," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. Every head turned. Clara's gasp was audible even from where Mercy stood. But it was Grafton's face that transformed most dramatically, from confident to ghostly pale in an instant. He stumbled back, gripping the auction block railing for support. You're dead," he stammered, the words barely audible. Mercy smiled thinly. "No, Master Grafton. Just sold. Like her." She nodded toward Clara. The crowd erupted in confused whispers. The bankmen exchanged glances, their attention now fully captured. "This is outrageous," Grafton found his voice, though it trembled. "This woman is a runaway. Seize her." But no one moved. Curiosity held the crowd in place, a spectacle more interesting than the planned auction unfolding before them. Mercy opened her basket. Before anyone buys anything today, they should know what they're really paying for. She withdrew the papers she'd taken from Crane. Water-stained but legible documents bearing Grafton's signature. She held them high for all to see. "These papers show that Master Grafton has been selling slaves illegally across state lines. They show that he's borrowed against the same property 3 times with different banks." The bankmen stepped forward, their faces darkening. "And they show," Mercy continued, her voice growing stronger, "that this plantation is worth less than the debt that stands against it." She handed the first paper to the nearest bank representative, who snatched it from her hand. The other documents she passed through the crowd, watching as they were examined and passed along with growing murmurs of concern. On the platform, Grafton's smile cracked like thin ice, his face contorted between rage and panic, eyes darting between the papers and the crowd. "Lies!" he spluttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Forgeries!" "Your signature, Grafton," one of the bankmen said coldly, holding up a document. "And your seal, on papers promising exclusive rights to property you'd already mortgaged to us." Another banker stepped forward. "And here, certification of sale for slaves you claimed as collateral on our loan." The crowd's whispers grew louder. The wealthy planters began to edge away from Grafton, distancing themselves from the stench of financial disaster. Mercy stood firm, watching as the man who had humiliated her now faced his own public unraveling. The basket hung empty at her side, its contents scattered among the people who would determine Grafton's fate. Clara looked down from the auction block, her eyes locked with Mercy's, tears still streaming down her face. But now something else showed there, too. A glimmer of hope, tiny but unmistakable. "These are legal documents," the eldest banker declared, waving the paper in his hand. His face flushed red with anger. "Grafton, you pledged this land to 3 separate banks." The other creditors pushed forward now, abandoning all pretense of politeness. Their voices rose over each other like a pack of hounds catching a scent. "You told us you owned 60 slaves outright. That cotton yield would double this season. Fraudulent collateral on every loan." Grafton shook his head wildly, sweat pouring down his temples despite the morning air. His carefully constructed world crumbled before his eyes. "It's all lies," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "Those papers are forgeries. That woman," he pointed a trembling finger at Mercy, "she's nothing but a runaway slave spreading falsehoods." He lunged forward, nearly falling down the steps as he scrambled toward the nearest banker. "Give those to me." His fingers clawed at the documents, tearing one down the middle before the banker could pull away. The crowd backed up, creating a circle of space around the unfolding chaos. The auction had transformed into something no one had expected. The seller himself now exposed before his buyers. Clara, still bound on the auction block, found her voice. "She speaks the truth." Her words cut through the commotion, clear and strong despite her tears. Master Grafton hid money from the banks. He sold people he didn't legally own. All eyes turned to her. In that moment of distraction, Grafton's hand moved to his waistcoat. "I taught his children to read while he forbade us the same," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. "I cleaned the rooms where he hid his papers. I heard every lie he told." "Silence!" Grafton roared. His hand emerged with a small silver pistol. The crowd gasped and scattered backward, leaving Mercy standing alone before him. The banker who had been closest to Grafton stumbled and fell, crawling away on all fours. Grafton's eyes were wild now, the eyes of a cornered animal. "You ungrateful wretches!" he snarled, swinging the pistol between Mercy and Clara. "After all, I provided." He fired. The shot cracked across the yard. Women screamed. Men ducked. The bullet splintered wood somewhere behind Mercy, who hadn't flinched. She stood solid as stone, eyes locked on Grafton. "You missed," she said quietly. Grafton snarled and raised the pistol again, steadying his arm this time. He aimed directly at Mercy's chest, finger tightening on the trigger. "No!" Clara cried. In a blur of motion, she threw herself forward. Despite her bound wrists, she grabbed Grafton's shooting arm just as the pistol fired again. The gun discharged with a thunderous crack, but the bullet went wild as they struggled. They spun together in a terrible dance, Clara clinging to his arm, Grafton trying to throw her off. The pistol pointed upward, then down, then a third shot exploded between them. Grafton went suddenly still. His eyes widened in shock. A dark stain spread across his fine white shirt, just below his ribs. The pistol clattered to the wooden platform. "You," he gasped, looking down at his stomach, where blood seeped between his fingers. "What have you?" He stumbled backward, collapsing onto the auction block. His breath came in ragged gasps. Clara stood frozen, her bound hands still outstretched, her face a mask of shock. The crowd remained paralyzed, watching as the master of Grafton Plantation lay bleeding on his own auction stage. No one moved to help him. Mercy walked forward slowly, mounting the steps with deliberate calm. She knelt beside Grafton, close enough that only he could hear her words. "You sold me cheap," she said quietly, her voice steady and clear, "but I bought back my soul full price." Grafton's eyes found hers, clouding with pain and something like recognition. His mouth worked soundlessly, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Blood trickled from the corner of his lips. "The debt is paid," Mercy whispered. "Not just mine. All of us." His gaze flickered past her, up to the sky, then glazed over. A final shuddering breath escaped him as blood pooled beneath the auction block, seeping into the thirsty dirt. Behind them, someone shouted. In the commotion, a lantern had fallen from its hook on a nearby post. Oil spilled across the dry wooden platform, catching flame instantly. Fire licked up the side of the auction block, hungry and bright in the morning air. "Mercy!" Clara cried. "The fire!" Mercy stood, turning to Clara. With quick fingers, she untied her friend's bound wrists. The flames climbed higher now, catching the fresh paint of the auction stage. Smoke billowed upward in thick black clouds. People ran in all directions, abandoning the papers, the auction, the dead man. The bankers fled toward their horses, still clutching the documents that proved Grafton's fraud. Servants scattered, some running toward the slave quarters to warn others, some simply escaping into the surrounding fields. The fire raced along the platform, finding the ribbons that decorated the area. They caught like fuses, carrying flame toward the main house where they were tied to the porch columns. "We need to go," Mercy said, pulling Clara away from the spreading blaze. "Now!" They stumbled down the steps together, choking on smoke. Behind them, the auction platform had become a pyre, flames consuming the wood that had held so many lives for sale. Heat pressed against their backs as they ran across the yard. The mansion's porch had caught fire now, dry wood and cotton decorations feeding the hungry flames. Windows shattered from the heat, sending glass spraying across the manicured lawn. "This way," Mercy gasped, guiding Clara toward the tree line beyond the fields. They didn't look back until they reached the cover of the forest. There, hidden among the thick trunks, they turned to see Grafton Plantation transformed. The auction block had collapsed into burning rubble. The mansion's white columns were wrapped in flame, black smoke pouring from every window. The fire painted the morning sky a terrible, beautiful red. "It's gone," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "All of it." Mercy nodded, her hand finding Clara's. "Yes," she said simply. "It's gone." They stood together at the forest's edge as the place that had imprisoned them devoured itself in flame and smoke. Night fell like a mercy over the land. Stars pierced the darkness one by one, and a half-moon hung silver in the sky. The air smelled of smoke even miles away from what remained of Grafton Plantation. By the river's edge, 3 figures moved quietly through the shadows. Mercy led the way, her large frame steady and purposeful, as she guided Clara and Preacher Saul down to a small clearing hidden by drooping willows. The water lapped gently against the muddy bank, where a flatboat waited, half hidden beneath overhanging branches. "The Lord provides," Preacher Saul whispered, his weathered hand touching the boat's wooden side. His thin frame seemed to gather strength in the moonlight. Just as he parted the waters for Moses, Clara looked nervously over her shoulder. "Will they come after us?" "Not tonight," Mercy said. "Too busy counting their losses." She placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "And by morning, we'll be far from here." Mercy had prepared carefully. Earlier, while flames consumed the auction block, she had slipped away to the smokehouse. Behind it, she dug where she remembered seeing Grafton's crude map burned into the crate lid 2 months before. 6 feet down, her fingers had found a metal box. Inside lay silver coins, jewelry, and banknotes, Grafton's secret hoard, hidden from creditors and family alike. Now she pulled a small leather pouch from her dress pocket. It clinked heavily with Crane's gold coins. "Between these and what was buried, we have enough to buy passage all the way north." Preacher Saul nodded, his white hair gleaming in the darkness. The wicked man's treasure turned to righteous purpose. They loaded the boat methodically. Blankets, dried meat, a sack of cornmeal, 2 water jugs, a small box containing Saul's Bible. Clara had managed to grab a knife from the kitchen and a change of clothes. Everything they owned in the world fit easily beneath the boat's center bench. As Mercy stowed the last bundle, she paused. From their position, a red glow was visible above the tree line. Grafton Plantation still burning, feeding on decades of cruelty and lies. "Should we wait for others?" Clara asked softly. "There might be more trying to escape in the confusion." Mercy shook her head. "Those who could run already have. The rest will hide until morning." Her voice was firm but gentle. "We can help them better once we're free ourselves." Preacher Saul placed a hand on the boat's bow. "Let us pray before we depart," he said. His voice, though quiet, carried the strength that had comforted so many through years of hardship. They bowed their heads as he spoke. "Lord, guide our vessel through these waters. Protect those still in bondage. And forgive us our trespasses." He paused, his eyes meeting Mercy's for a moment. "As we forgive those who trespass against us." Mercy's jaw tightened at these words. Forgiveness felt distant, impossible. But she nodded anyway. Together, they pushed the flatboat into the current. Preacher Saul climbed aboard first, then helped Clara. Mercy gave one final push before pulling herself up, water soaking her skirts. The small craft rocked, then steadied as she took up the pole. Behind them, the plantation's glow painted the night sky crimson. Ahead, the river stretched dark and promising. Mercy faced forward, refusing to look back at the flames. That part of her life was ash now. Only the river mattered, carrying them toward something new. Clara sat huddled in the center, arms wrapped around her knees. "I never thought I'd leave that place," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the water's gentle sounds. "Best not to speak too loud," Mercy cautioned, though her eyes softened. "Sound carries over water." They drifted through the night, taking turns with the pole, keeping close to the shadows along the riverbank. When dawn threatened the eastern sky, they guided the boat into a hidden inlet overgrown with cypress trees and waited out the day, speaking little, eating cold food, listening for pursuers who never came. 6 weeks later, they reached a settlement in Ohio. A community of free blacks and sympathetic Quakers welcomed them without questions. Mercy used Grafton's silver to secure a small cabin on the outskirts of town. There, they began building something they'd never had, a life of their own making. Word traveled along the secret pathways used by those seeking freedom. Within months, the first runaways appeared at their door, guided by whispered directions. Mercy took them in, fed them, and taught them the safest routes northward. "You know the bayou paths?" one young man asked, amazed at her detailed knowledge of southern waterways. "I learned them with my life," she answered simply. Soon, Mercy began leading groups herself, traveling south to guide others north. She developed a reputation for finding paths others couldn't see, for knowing when to move and when to hide. Her size, once mocked, became her shield. Who would suspect such a large woman of moving so silently through the night? On Sundays, she sat beside Preacher Saul as he delivered sermons in their growing community. Sometimes, when he finished, she would stand and speak. Her words were few, but carried weight. "The Bible says the sins of the father shall be visited upon the children," she would say, her voice steady and clear. "But I've seen how the weight of sin always drags its master down. Those who built their fortune on our backs found themselves buried beneath it." People listened, drawn by the quiet power in her words. Some whispered that she had escaped death itself, that she had walked through fire untouched. Years passed. The country tore itself apart in war, and slowly, painfully began to stitch itself back together. Through it all, Mercy continued her work, guiding those still seeking freedom along hidden paths. Travelers passing through Louisiana sometimes spoke of a ghostly wagon sunken in Bayou des Lys. Local legends claimed that on moonless nights you could hear chains rattling beneath the murky water, the sound of a slave trader paying for his sins, and they whispered of a large woman who appeared at crossroads to lead the lost to safety, vanishing with the morning mist. One spring morning, just as dawn broke over the river near their Ohio home, Mercy stood on the bank watching the water flow past. Clara joined her, their shoulders touching comfortably. 10 years, Clara said softly. 10 years since we left. Mercy nodded, her face peaceful in the growing light. The rising sun turned the water to liquid gold, flowing north toward greater freedom. Do you ever think about them? Clara asked. Grafton. Crane. No, Mercy answered truthfully. They don't deserve my thoughts. She took Clara's hand, feeling its warmth against her palm. The light swept over them, painting everything in brilliant yellow. Birds called from nearby trees. The river flowed on, constant and sure. They mocked my weight, Mercy murmured, watching the current carry leaves and twigs toward distant shores. But it was their cruelty that sank heavier than any flesh could bear. Clara squeezed her hand. Together, they stood in the light of a new day, bearing only the weight of their freedom. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.